I'll just start by, for those of you who haven't already heard, just talking about how I came to this body of work and this style of work and all this fun mixed media stuff. I have been an artist for my whole life, I guess, although, throughout one's life you identify as different labels, different titles. But I have practiced art through my whole life. Previously to this segment of collaging and mixed media, I made jewelry for nearly 20 years. Mostly I was a bench freelance metalsmith working for other artists kind of all around the country, which was a lovely, lovely, lovely thing to do. It's a great lifestyle. Part-time, flexible, just really great. And then several years ago I realized that I was having some burnout on that, and my dear, dear husband supported me in quitting, basically. He said, well, why don't you quit? And I looked at him and I said, really? He said, really? So that was the end of my jewelry career working for other people, and then I continued with my own line of jewelry that is represented here on Helene and Maggie and myself. In college, I did go to art school, Cleveland Institute of Art, back in the 90s. And interestingly enough, I flip-flopped majors. I started as a painting major. And then I got into photography, but I really, when I found the enameling department, which is glass on metal, I kind of fell in love. And there was an enameling aspect to a lot of the jewelry that I did for other people. And then when I moved out of working for other people, I just focused on my really simple, colorful line of cutout enamel jewelry, which was super fun. And for a time, I thought that that's what I was going to go into. But on the sidelines, I took a little day workshop with a good friend who was a therapist, and she presented this little day workshop that was collage, like collage therapy or collage journaling, and I just went. And I will tell you, that is the moment that basically started, slowly, but started all of this, because I'd never collaged ever in my life. And so I started a little collage practice, probably like 7 years ago. And I would just get it out on the kitchen table with glue sticks and magazines, and oh man, is that fun. Just I realize now, not having any responsibility for the colors or the lines or the shapes, and just being able to design was super fun. And then, so that's how this all started, in sketchbooks, collaging. I have a couple previous to this. I have a whole pile of these sketchbooks, and they are very near and dear to me because, partially because of what cool objects are sketchbooks, and partially because they really are journals, and they really do illustrate trajectory of this whole kind of becoming. And now I still keep a sketchbook, but it's very, it feels very different. And so these, I feel like, are the way I worked in these, and these were just private, very, very private, and I wasn't doing them for anybody but me. So these feel like a different time in my life, and I really, really love them. So I just started out, just having fun, cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste, just having, also pretty early on came the desire to do some minimalist poetry or titles, which carries through to my titles now. I would love to continue to incorporate text in various ways, but I guess the text and numbers come in, but less kind of directly. So these are just lovely objects and just really show the trajectory. At some point, I finally started mixed media, some collage, and then I just started doing some drawing, experimenting with stamp making, and stencil making. The text comes in here too, and oh man, I love these things. this shape is actually the cutout shape of, this is where that came from, which, there's a lot, there is crossover. It is that shape, and this shape came first, interestingly enough. A friend recently said to me, and it didn't occur to me until she said it, that she said, it's so interesting that you are so drawn to the cutouts. And it really is. It was kind of a breath of fresh air or encouragement for me, because there is part of me that's sad to give these things up, but there's definitely a follow through. There's definitely, it makes me realize that it's all still there, as it always is with us humans. It's all still there and unprocessed. So these are super fun, and at some point I kind of went all in on the mixed media and really decided to get braver about the layering and getting it a little looser and incorporating paint, which felt new to me. I was introduced, I think, from my mom to the gel plate monoprinting. Super fun, super fun. And due to that, I started using prayers and just started using some different tools, still collaging and finding like found papers and objects, and just really exploring. So I adore these because they really show the trajectory of the work. So great. A lot of it, this was the first, I think this actually was the first panel that I've since learned is I don't know if any of you other artists ever work with like a junk panel or a trash panel, and that's actually how I start using my sketchbooks now, is if I have leftover paint or a leftover something, I'll just go over there and kind of glom it on that. And this page was that, and I love this page, and how that reveals when you're really just being free, you can come up with some really fun stuff, which is the object. So great. I started developing into a style that is much busier and much more full, much more layered, which is something I'm really drawn to in other people's work, and I continue to be drawn to in my work, and I desire to just kind of push the layers and push the levels even farther, and I look forward to where it goes. So I started these two pieces to answer your question, Maggie. Maggie was asking, are there pieces that are older than others? And those were the first two panels actually that I did off of the sketchbook. And Wednesday's work is the title. So just starting, and of course that felt really vulnerable to get out of the sketchbook and work on panels, because it feels like something, and if it's out of the sketchbook and on panels, then it's probably not just for yourself, it might eventually be for other people. And actually the gentleman that purchased those pieces is a friend of mine, and he hit it nail on the head. He actually said that out loud to me. He said there's a vulnerability in those pieces that is very evident, which was really sweet, and until he said it, I didn't necessarily know that it was true, but it is true. Those were the first, and I guess you could see a trajectory, like the pieces that have a little more of the ground showing in them were kind of me getting into how do you use paint, how do you incorporate stencils. Super apparent to me really early on that I love to use stencils and all of these cutouts, tape, cutouts, stencils, collage. I usually start with paint just to get a ground, and I always pretty quickly dive into collage cutout. Say it again.
What kind of paint are you attracted to? Like, what are these oils? Are they acrylic?
I've only worked in acrylic.
Okay.
I have never worked in oils or any other acrylic or watercolor. love the immediacy of the acrylic. I love the quick drying time. I love the bright colors. I really have to say I like humble materials. I've always liked humble materials. I love paper. I love enamel goes on copper. You know, the way I mostly work with it, and I love like the humble material of copper. So pretty quickly outside of the sketchbooks, I came to identify, as I'm sure everybody else here has identified, this art practice as a metaphor for life, right? It's just, you start, you get in the weeds, you just have to keep going. You have to keep, if you don't know how to do it, you figure out how to do it, learn how to do it, keep going, you keep layering, and the whole practice is just about staying present with it and continuing and trying to keep that channel open for what comes next without attachment. And that's something in the last year, which none of this work represents. Let me see. This piece is probably in the last year over here, and the small ones, these small ones along the wall are probably in the last year, and they are definitely more, oh yeah, this one is one of my recent ones on the end here. They are definitely a little bit more layered and nuanced and less careful. You're really trying to push through the moments of attachment and identify with this idea that art is just an artifact of the process, and just keep the process going at all costs. Just keep the process going, and at some point I find myself just at peace with where it is, and then we call it done. But you continue on, and it still is a process. Does anybody want to ask questions, or I would love it if I could.
First, a dumb question. Are you using white gesso or white paint?
Gesso, start with gesso. And I use white paint, but I use gesso. So I use gesso as well. Like that piece, Mixed Messages there, is gesso, and then white paint, right? Like the less opaque.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love using gesso. I love humble materials. I've learned about myself that I'm really after, which is connected to the friend who said it's interesting that you're so drawn to cutouts, because I do a lot of cutting, and I love what comes out of I love the negative shape. I love the leftovers. I always cut out the positive shape, but then fall in love with the negative shape.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of fun because I kind of have amnesia around it. Like I never see the negative shape before it's a scrap, or I love using the leftovers, or I love, just any of the byproducts.
Well, it's an opening, right? A negative shape is an opening, as much as other people view it as a closed.
Oh.
So,
yeah.
And I teach drawing a lot, and I always think about, they're not seeing the negative, but until they see the negative, they don't realize how open that space is now and how it changes. So I think about your earrings and how all your spaces, have that opening where that becomes one of its own. It's kind of out there.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
that is a metaphor in life, right? Is to
It is.
see the other side, to see
Yeah.
something else
Yeah.
that's not there.
And I do a lot, like it's evidenced quite a bit in this piece here.
This last
The one on the end, the white shapes are paper. I've been taking several classes this last year, and a lot of folks are, so the white paper is collaged.
Mhm.
A lot of people I have noticed, would apply the white, kind of those shapes with the swoops, with paint. And if I apply with paint, I could do those same shapes with paint, and it would not appeal to me. but if I have a big cutout, especially if it's kind of a found cutout, so those cutouts come from just doing big kind of monoprint, free brushstroke monoprints, and then I'll end up cutting out the exterior line, and then I'll be left, and I never end up using the brushstrokes, which are so beautiful, like, you know, a little bit of a dry brush, and just kind of like some swooping lines, which I love, and that's what I'm making, but then the only part I ever use is that negative shape, and I love how, to your point, Helene, it is an opening. You're covering up a good percentage of what's under there, but but it makes so much more of a rich experience, which is why I love the layers. I love the idea that, I love the busyness in it. Like, my favorite part of a painting actually is when it gets just a total wreck, when it gets wild, that's when I just like start to get excited, and I kind of realize, for the purpose of design principles, sometimes you need to back it off a little bit, but when it gets really wild and kind of chaotic, I really fall in love, and this is a really great way to, you know, keep that pass through to that chaos, but have the openings, shall you say. And I do think of the different spaces as revealing, speaking of metaphor, revealing different, you know, rooms, different spaces, different, you know, time frames in a human's life, different emotional spaces, thought spaces.
How many years ago was it that you started those journals?
I'm 46 now. I was doing them when I was 40, so probably 7 or 8 years. Yeah.
So I have a question about, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So Erin and I actually walk a lot. So I hear a lot about the classes she's taking and the process that she has. So it's really nice because I've seen some of her work, but this is the first time to physically be in the space with it. So I have a couple questions, and one is kind of like a curiosity from the perspective of you as a designer versus an artist, right? Because there's a difference.
Yeah.
And you spent 20 years, and Erin's not really explaining to you how intense a jeweler she is. I've been a jeweler for 20 years. I could not do what she does. Her speciality is in high end intricate work, which that itself is amazing, because this is like, at some level, the opposite of it, right? This is the explosion of that containment. But my curiosity as I was walking around is, when do you decide which way is up? Because a graphic designer would start this way, right? Like, this is how I'm doing it. But the artist in you may just lay it on the ground and say, what's gonna happen? So I just was curious, that was one of my questions, was I'm curious how you walk around this work.
Well, my studio is quite a small space.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, 12 by 13 or 11 by 12 or something. So there's actually not much walking around that happens,
Yep.
which is one of the reasons.
I know there's no walking.
Which is one of the reasons it's so fun to see it up here. So interesting that you should say that. A lot of the folks that I've been taking classes with, a lot of them work on squares, simply because, and they encourage you during the process to shift them, you know, shift. I, however,
well, you're also used to the sketchbook, right? Was you open up and you start from top to bottom, left to right, right? That's it kind of creates a form.
It does.
That's what I'm fascinated by, is like, if I flipped any of these around, what would happen?
So this, with a couple of exceptions, this little one was the result of one on the end was a result of a class, and that shifted. I worked on it in many directions, and now I would say when I'm working, I shifted a lot of times, and the jury's always out at when it will end. But with a couple of exceptions, this one I worked on vertically, and it wasn't until I had decided that it was done that it went on the wall horizontally. And this one, the bright side here, the big square, I worked on it the opposite. And it wasn't until I decided that I was through with it that I found that it worked. I liked it better that way. With those two exceptions, the square format isn't necessarily my favorite format, maybe because of this, because these are my roots. I really do like the rectangular format. But the folks that I've been working with in these classes are, encouraging the square format, and anything that is a square format is much more likely to get shifted
Yeah.
many, many times.
I guess I like the blend of it.
In fact, these little ones, I would love to be able to hang them, to be able to leave them
Four hooks.
hangable however, and how cool that they could, all of those, the jury's kind of out, it could go many ways.
We have a great artist here, and Ellen's heard of her, Barbara Loken, who's the high school art teacher here for many years, and she's close to 80 now. She used to wire her paintings in every rotation,
Wow.
option,
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
cool.
which is always hysterical because
Yeah.
she has so much energy, even at her age. Like, you gotta hang it this way, and you gotta hang it that way, you gotta hang it this way, you gotta hang it this way. And it wired it that way too, and you look and you go, you really did. It's such a character.
Well, I'm working out the whole links, and a lot of them, they don't sign it, they sign it in the back, because if it's an abstract, hang it the way it makes sense to you,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, I think technically, somebody could hang most of these however they like, but really, they're all pretty clear how they're meant.
Do you work on multiple pieces at the same time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Many, many, many. Probably too much.
Yeah, no, I
Too many. Yeah. Once again, I've been taking classes, and lots of artists, accomplished artists, recommend working a series.
Yeah.
In the theory that you choose a number, usually between 3 and 7, and you just work through those. And in theory that you keep all of the panels at the same stage of a painting. And once you're on the 5th one, then you've learned something, and you go back to the first one and do it again. I have to say it's a big challenge for me to work in series. While I do have lots of things, these two can attest, lots of things happening and lots of things in progress, I'm not sure that they ever end up, I could ever relate to them or refer to them as series, so to speak.
Well, one of the things is that you use your pink.
Yeah.
Use pink
Yeah.
really brings
That's
all of
interesting.
this together. And then some of your shapes, like that pink
Yeah.
circular was the stencil for over there. So you
Yeah.
Or it
have
feels that way, yeah.
you have
No,
a
I
lot
like-
of stuff that actually pulls together very, very well. I mean, this is a beautiful exhibition.
Yeah, thank you. I love the pink. So to David's question, they came and interviewed me, and we just talked, and there wasn't really an interview, but at the end he did say, how
Oh,
Well-
you guys are the ones that did the video?
yes.
Okay, it's all coming together.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, for the moment.
How would you title yourself? I was speaking to them about the importance of titles to me, and how the titles come either in process, or I pick up tidbits or sound bites and I write them down, and I apply them, none of which are even remotely literal most of the time. But this idea of like this explorer, and the idea of I do not consider myself an explorer in the world. I'm not adventuresome. I'm kind of a homebody, and I like to stick to home, and yet in this realm, it feels I just feel much more of an explorer. And to your point about the colors and the pinks, I love this fluorescent orange. Like, I love bright orange. You will never catch me in orange. You will never catch anything else in my life being bright orange. And the pink as well. Like, I've been drawn to pink as an adult, not as a kid. I was a tomboy, but yeah, like you discover, to the idea that there are these different spaces and these path through, all this layering, you discover things about yourself. How else would I have known? And it comes out in here, and I love pink. I love using pink. I love using bright orange. some of the fluorescent colors. Yeah.
There's a relationship, of course, with your color theory and emotions. So, right, when you're looking at like when we're on the spectrum of color. And so a lot of people like would see red and they see power or they see anger. Or, I'm just curious, what does orange represent to you? So I would love to know, because if you're saying, because I know if it's not something that you're drawn to, in the expression of yourself on the outside, but you do this, it's almost like there's an inner journey you're having. I'm just curious, what is that pink and that orange, what does it signify to you?
Maggie, I will say we're all gonna have to continue to be curious about that. I don't have an answer.
No, I just was curious.
I think it's attuned to kind of, actually, I love the minimalist kind of more etheric kind of poetic titling, and I love that a lot of people would prefer things to have literal translations. And especially in a lot of these things, if I post them on socials, people will have, specific associations or responses, and I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I have zero literal, some in here, but for these, it's just process, it's shape. I'm happy to say it's hard taking classes and from professional artists and onboarding kind of principles, because when I started this, obviously I've had a career, in the crafts, but I don't remember anything from art school. I just don't, and I don't.
It's been a few years.
I haven't until now, I haven't thought about any of the art principles while making this work. So it's all kind of, it's like kind of like the beginner's kind of, the childlike mind.
I think about, when I look at these pieces, I feel like you're following intuition.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
So,
the
I
word
mean,
that came to me was intuitive.
It's just, whether, there's an intentionality in that or not. But clearly there's an intentionality with using, the leftover this, the piece of that. There's a lack, it seems like a lack of intention, but it's not at the same time, and then working with color, I've never used color in a way that I've thought about my emotion for using it. It's just, there is an attraction to it.
Yeah.
Whether it's your intuition or whether it just looks nice, whatever, but because you use so much white and black and variations of that, it creates the hot spot, and your eye is drawn to the warmness. So what I like about your use of color is, there's a void because the white and the black, and then the vibrant color kind of, creates a space for your eye to visually work around. Like just any kind of composition. It feels like there's a map in your paintings for each one, It's kind of
Lovely. Write that down. Can we write that down?
It's being recorded.
Yeah, I love that. At some point,
they're yours though, for sure.
At some
Yeah.
point, I have recognized, I guess I started, I'm looking through that room, into that room now, and recognizing when I started painting in my sketchbooks, I was using the gel plate and I was using the collage, and just this year I have come to, speaking of labels, I've come to identify that I don't resonate with the title painter, because if I have a paintbrush and paints and a surface, I would not be interested in doing this. If that's all I had at my disposal, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't do it, I wouldn't do art. And so, to the idea of designing, I feel like when I get the collage involved, and my mom's a designer, she's an artist, she's really, the art that she does is very, very, very much design oriented, and I do feel like designing is something that I am drawn to and that I do quite a bit. More than painting, so to speak, and when I apply paint these days, a lot of times it's not with a brush. It's with a brayer or a scraper or, dripping or squeegeeing, which is so fun. So fun.
I think there's something so beautiful, like when you, like so many times I'll give kids like junky paper and they make the most of it, right? And then it's the weirdest thing, and then you have adult students who bought their paper and they know how much it costs, and then they're just too afraid to use it. But then they'll use like the nicest paint on the worst paper and then have a terrible experience. It's just like something precious, I guess it's like that sense of preciousness that is interesting to me about the way you're working with using the pieces, like, and pulling it when you're in the journal, and then the preciousness between making something that feels fairly private to, you know, making the jump to something that is public and shared. That's a huge conversation too, you know. Were you nervous for having the show?
Yes, but not for that reason.
Okay. It's always really petrifying having a solo show in
Yeah.
general, but
Yeah, I was very nervous, Maggie can attest,
yeah, I would jump
about,
to it rather.
mostly about all the conversations of having enough and being enough. You know,
Yeah.
and now that I
Yeah.
realize, Maggie kept saying, Erin, your pieces are so full, you could just put one on each wall and it would be enough, you know,
Oh, interesting.
and,
It's with a bench.
you
A
know,
bench and a notebook. Tell me what you think.
with, you know, inviting people just to spend more time with each piece. And so mostly it was nervous about that. I guess I didn't give my brain the opportunity to be nervous about the, you know, kind of like personal reveal.
Yeah.
And these, you know, these are very personal. And I, interestingly enough, I'm happy to share them. I just feel like I'm human, we must all be human. Like whatever is in here is probably whatever is in every, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We all learn things.
Yeah, and I feel like it's really, at this point I feel like these are, at this point, because this is my first, I think this actually represents a body of work, considering the classes that I've been taking and kind of the different directions that I'd like to go, and then I feel like I have a little trajectory to go in some new spaces. So I feel like as much as I beat myself up about filling this space, and I feel I was taking classes and making, I didn't make a lot of new work in this year, and I felt, you know, nervous about that. But in a way, it's just so perfect because this kind of represents a body of work. And I feel like there's shift coming, for sure. Yeah.
Can you talk about that shift or what directions you're pushing yourself into now?
Yeah. I would really love to explore more, like push the layering more and push the the idea of conceal and reveal, and having, you know, smaller, more concise areas of revealing. I'd like to learn to be a little bit more expressive with the paint I use. There's a certain amount of organization to all of these pieces, you know, to all of these pieces in a way, even though there's a lot to them. I think there's more expression to be had as far as exploring different ways of applying paints. Like I'm more apt to drip and drop and splash and really let paint be paint, and then have more of a dynamic kind of contrast between the hard edges of the collage. Yeah, I mean, time will tell, but that's where I feel like.
What about on the side of the building?
Oh,
Go big or go home.
That would be.
yeah. What about that?
I mean, wouldn't that be amazing to have one of these pieces on the side of the building?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
are
So next
appreciative of me throwing that out there, but they do have like an urban feel
Yes.
to them. They have
Yeah.
an urban, like a grime, graffiti, whatever. You know, there's like a dirtiness
Yeah.
to them, even
I
though
love
with the
it.
white and the black.
No, I love it. I have to say I've learned so much. I learned so much listening to people, like Justin, there's a vulnerability here. I was like, oh yeah, you don't say. But I would never have said that about that piece. And I find it very gratifying for people to say, like, there's a dirtiness. So I love it when things get a little dirty, or like vintaged, or like roughed up a little bit.
She wants you to use spray paint.
I wanted to turn on the torch and
You know,
scared everyone.
I
Yeah,
do use
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I do use spray paint now, actually. Is there any spray paint here? Let me think. I don't, oh, there's a little spray paint over here. And in these small ones, you'll find spray paint, but I did get myself a couple of jars, bottles of spray paint, and yeah.
So I just used spray paint for the first time yesterday.
Oh,
my.
yay.
What kind of spray paint are you using? Just like hardware store spray paint, or are you using like
No.
Liquitex?
I went down, I don't know if you have ever been to Brunswick, but there's this sweetest little store called The Mix.
No, but I go to Brunswick, but I've never seen it.
And she has spray paint in there. It's acrylic spray paint. I don't think it's Liquitex brand, but it's just like acrylic spray paint. Comes in all sorts of pretty colors, so you can spend a lot of money. But I limited myself to white and black and green and orange. And the way I love, and I've experimented with just using it as a can, but I love stencils
That's what I
and masks. And so you can see what, I don't know how to explain it, but there's that kind of feathering look, or I don't know how to.
Soft edge.
There's the
Yeah,
there's the
soft
hard
edge.
edge, and then there's the
There's
soft
like a
edge.
blur. There's a
Mhm.
blur between
Yeah.
that.
And it makes, there's a really graphic look to it, and it adds a little depth. So for sure, I mean, spray paint, I love the spray paint, and I would definitely love to. And I also, speaking of loving the moment, so another thing about loving the moment where things get out of control, like things get to be a total mess. I do not like out of controlness in my life. So it's like all these little spaces that we can be as artists that, you know, I just relish the out of control. And that's one of the things with a spray paint. If you lay a big stencil down and cover it with spray paint, you have no idea what you're gonna get. And I just love that. I love that not knowing. And the reveal is always fun. And if it's not fun, you know it immediately, and you say, oh, time for something else, and time for something else a little more, a little more drastic, which is always fun too.
I stood in front of that case at Artist and Craftsman in Portland with like 200 colors, and I'm like, I want that one.
And which one was it?
It was like a turquoise like that.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
unlocked it and gave it to me. He's like, final answer. I'm like, oh, you can't say that. There's like 200 colors. Yes, final answer. Because I just wanted to experiment with one before I, at like $12 a bottle.
Yeah.
You can't buy
Yeah.
too many at once. But the spray paint was really fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. Some of the colors, I have to say, the blue that I chose a blue, and I was a little bit like the white and black, the bright green. Some of the colors maybe were a little wan. Like they seemed bright, but in reality they were a little wan. And I really like saturated. Clearly, I like saturated colors. I like bright colors. I love experimenting with these days. Just where we might go, like just putting the paint out the tube right on the surface and smearing it around. And I don't have a great incentive to spend a lot of time mixing colors, and I know that's a thing with a lot of artists is you go down an endless road of mixing colors, and I just
Well, there's a immediacy, right, of just,
yes.
I mean, that's just the full-on pigmentation of expression of that color. You did a fabulous job hanging the show.
Thank you.
Like really, like
Very nice.
Thank
Yeah.
to take all of this and I'm just looking at how you did it, and it's
To make
fabulous.
continuity.
I mean, it was a wonderful show to hang because,
Yeah.
because of the work, and then also the way that you kind of like return to specific shapes and motifs, and like over and over again makes it almost like a puzzle, trying to figure out how to make it flow together.
Yeah. And she did it in about 20 minutes. It was
Wow.
pretty impressive.
Literally my job.
Impressive.
Yeah. But I wouldn't mind hearing from you all, like which pieces you connect with, or
I love this one with the blue explosion and then the nice soft curves of the pink. I like its simplicity
yeah,
and it makes me feel good.
yeah. That it's interesting. That piece actually, it can take me a really long time to make a painting, which is one of the reasons it's nice to have a whole bunch, you know, in the works. And that piece, the title, that piece is one one of the first ones that I worked on a piano, and it was in the end, after I was finished, you know, realizing the metaphor that painting is for life, and the title is "This is how it always had," knowing all the this is how it
had to be.
this is how it had to be. I think initially it was knowing every time that this is how it had to be, and just that idea of trusting in the process. Just, you can only make one mark at a time. Even if you're going to only make 2 marks for a whole painting or 3,000 marks for a whole painting, you can only do the one thing at the one time and do your best to stay as present as possible, you know, with each one, and not get attached to the past ones and not get attached to the future ones. And, you know, knowing it's like the title is just all about like that trusting in the process and knowing every time that, you know, you're where you need to be. You're the only place that you can be, and it's just where you need to be. So that was a sweet little painting for me, and it came out pretty quickly, which is not how my experience with my art has progressed. Sometimes it takes a long time, which doesn't mean it's unpleasant. It just means that my paintings and I can tend to have long, drawn-out conversations over many, many, many cups of coffee and tea. And
So I have a question for you, then
Yeah.
kind of related. How does it feel to sell them? To let them go?
Good. Yeah. Well, with the exception of the scam pieces, which is actually, I think it's really interesting because these are the first pieces that I've sold, and it feels good. And there were some red dots when I walked in for the opening, and there were 2 on those pieces down here in the entryway, which I've subsequently learned that was a scam. And same individual or individuals did it to me personally within the last couple of weeks. But those pieces, one of those pieces in particular, I saw that the red on it, and I had a little bit of a contraction because the one is history of the memory. It feels pretty personal. But as it turns out, it's not sold. So it was like it was kind of this like good experience.
Yeah.
But it feels fine. Yeah. Good. Affirming, for sure.
One of the things that I love about your work and your sketches and some of the pieces that are in here, and this is one of my favorites for sure, is that they all do look a little bit like puzzle pieces. Like you could find the other one that's going to continue that road, that journey, that line. And as we were seeing the echoing of this form, you know, that's very present, and yet it's just an echo in this. And you had this wonderful, you know, when you were talking earlier, and you were talking about this being kind of an expression of life and just the process of getting messy, and that there's always like a lighted path. And so in a lot of them, there's some kind of pathway. There's some kind of, there's something that's taking you out if you want to go out, or you can stay in if you want to stay in. And I like that about your work. And that's partly why I was asking about the direction in which you make it, right? Because if you turned it right, the path would be in another direction.
Oh, yeah.
And yet there is an immediacy about how you make your marks, that there's this expression of your line that has so many different levels of hardness and softness, that some of them feel like journeys you can go on and stay, and others are like, no, there's an end, you're done, this is over. And I like that about your work. I've always liked that about your work. I have an agreement with her, which is I don't like that this one looks angry.
Oh, I love that.
I know, yeah, but we have this
I love
big,
that.
and it was a conversation we had with her mom. Because didn't your mom have she had some reaction to that, and I was like, yeah, there's something about it for me that I feel like, I think it's too much Harry Potter or something, like Voldemort's in the front of that one. But I just, what's interesting about that is, I think that I'm attracted to the lines that move out and where that one is contracting in, right? And so it's not that I'm not attracted to it as a piece, but just I love your mark making.
Are you using crayon at all? Oil stick or crayon?
Oil stick, yeah, so I use acrylic paint. Anything that I can use as collage, whether it's painted paper or found papers, I use oil stick, I use Posca pens, I use ballpoint pens, crayons. And of course, I love people, when people say don't use oils and oil and water don't mix, don't put oil pastels under acrylic, but it's so fun to put oil pastels under acrylic, because then you peel the acrylic away, the acrylic doesn't stick and you get this like gritty kind of,
Grunge, you get the grunge.
you get that grunge, I mean, I love it, somebody says don't do this and it's like, ooh,
Okay.
let's see why they say don't do that.
Well, rules are meant to be broken.
There you go.
Yes, bend it
Yeah.
around.
Well, it is interesting, Maggie, as obviously these, as you can tell, are worked, obviously I work them in a sketchbook, but I definitely work them as panels together, whether or not they kind of look directly worked on together. And that was the first one, and one of the things when I was thinking about moving out of the sketchbook, one of the things that was difficult is that it's working on a singular piece. And so, in a way, and after those, I thought I would work more in diptych, but it hasn't worked out. But I really see what you're saying, and I appreciate that, and it's not something I have consciously thought about. Clearly, I love the pathways that travel through. I love that about other people's work as well.
This one feels like a whole trip. There's so many journeys in this big one right here.
I keep thinking about how this big one anchors the space, because of the size, but it has a very different feel from the other ones. So did you feel differently when you were working bigger?
Well, yeah, working bigger is different, for sure. To your point about on the side of a building, my mom generously was excited for, it's an obvious step to go bigger with these pieces, and she brought me some big panels, and I was all excited. And pretty quickly, it took me a while to realize it, but I started working on some big panels. This one I had a really fun time with, but I've since realized that I'm really not ready to work bigger. This is the biggest. I have another couple of panels that size, which is 24 by 36, or something like that. So yeah, the bigger, you have to have bigger tools if you want to have the same free kind of look or feel. You have to move your body more if you want to have the same kind of free, in a small space. So yeah, I really like that piece. But you are right. It definitely has a different feel. I like all the different spaces in that piece a lot. All the different applications. Masking tape is my friend, for sure. Those little spaces of torn masking tape. I love all the different spaces and the pathway moving